What is it through? Oh God. Okay. Very clever. So, at the bottom of everything that we talk about when we talk about art is the unanswered, dirty question. What is art for? Why do we like it? My friend Danny Hillis, who's a scientist, was asked by a quite high-powered science journal to, along with a number of other scientists, to say what was the most interesting question to him. He's a computer scientist and an inventor. And the other people wrote in things like, will the Riemann hypothesis be confirmed? Quite complicated technical issues. And Danny's question was, why do we like music? And that is such a profoundly difficult question to answer that I don't know if I can really start answering at 3:17, but I shall have a go. First of all, it's interesting to me that it doesn't bother critics that that question is unanswered. The fundamental question of why do we want to engage with art at all? Just to say, well, because we like it, doesn't really answer the question. Because then you say, well, why do we like it? Why do we have preferences? Why do I prefer blues to reds? Why do I prefer Dave Brubeck to Mozart, for example? Or why do I prefer nearly anyone to Mozart, actually? Why do we make choices? For instance, why do I prefer things that to a Martian would be indistinguishable, like the late Haydn string quartets to the middle Beethoven string quartets? A Martian wouldn't tell the difference, they sound very similar. What is the root of preferences? And what are we doing when we engage with an artwork and enjoying it? So I thought I needed an example that we can all share, an artwork that we all actually have. So I decided to talk about haircuts. A haircut is a little artwork that everyone carries around on their head. Mine is hard to see, but I dyed it red for today. But when you have a haircut, well, first of all, there was a time when no one had haircuts. Probably Neolithic men and women didn't cut their hair, or if they did, they sort of tore bits off with stones or something like that. That's not generally what we think of as haircutting now, at least not where I come from. When you have your hair cut, you make, or have made in the past, a whole number of stylistic decisions. For instance, let's have a look at some of those. On the axis of masculine to feminine, where do you want to fall? Straight away you can see that that's going to change. It'll be different in 1970, a different question in 1970 from 2010 or 1930. So the first thing you have to notice is that stylistic axes are always in motion. They're not fixed points in cultural space. So, you know, when I was in my early days as a rock and roll star, I pictured myself far to the feminine side of the equation. And I did it mainly because girls seemed to like it. Okay, so here's another axis. Do you want to fit in or do you want to stand out? Conformist or rebel? Where are you going to fall on that? Most of us would probably end up around there somewhere. Some people with, I had a girlfriend with 11-inch green spikes in her hair at one point. She was sort of at that end, I would say, since she was 6'4" tall to start with. Dutch, very tall people. Here's another axis, natural, in many inverted commas. You can try, because as any woman knows, to get a natural look takes at least 3 hours in the hairdresser. contrived is where you obviously have made it up, like the Marge Simpson look. Oh, here's another one. This is now, sometimes a new axis appears in stylistic space. One that appeared quite recently was the choice between natural colour and impossible colour. I had dinner last night with a very attractive woman with bright green hair, sort of close to that colour. That wouldn't have been possible a few years ago, and probably nobody would have been particularly worried. They wouldn't have thought of doing it. It's another example of a technology appearing and suddenly stimulating a lot of possibilities. And another axis that appeared in about 1976 in London was this one, professional versus hacked about by a brainless cretin. Which was not a possibility that anyone had ever really considered before. So what I'm saying is that when you choose a haircut, really what you're doing is you're choosing a point in this multi-dimensional space. And there are many, many other axes you could have, like dreadlocks, or not dreadlocks. I'm never going to wash my hair again. That's a choice. So I think that this little artwork you carry around with you, why did we make those kinds of choices? I mean, a lot of you might say, well, I didn't make any of those choices, but because I always have my hair cut exactly the same way. Well, at some point, you or somebody made some choices, and those choices are part of the bundle you carry on your head, just like an earring is another set of choices. You know, an earring is a tiny little artwork that you carry with you. A tattoo is another one. Your clothes, all of those things represent a bundle of stylistic decisions that you've made. All of them are, in fact, you behaving as an artist in some way. My definition of the word culture, by the way, is a rather novel one, which artists don't always like. Culture is everything you don't have to do. So, all the things that we call culture are all the optional parts of our lives. You have to wear clothes, but they don't have to be Paul Smith or Levi or Chanel. We could all just sort of wear sacks if it was just about keeping warm, or animals. You have to eat, but you don't have to develop these incredibly beautiful exotic cuisines like Indian food with gold leaf over it, or stuffed jalapeno peppers with coconut shrimps, or whatever you do. You have to move around, actually, but you don't have to dance. So a lot of the things that humans do, in fact most of the things that humans who aren't in a disastrously difficult situation do, are stylistic choices. So we're constantly navigating our way through stylistic worlds. And what's the point of doing that? Why do we do that? Why are we so interested in it? Why are we all caught up in it? It's very hard to find anyone who isn't doing it, actually, at some level or another, who doesn't have those kinds of preferences, and who doesn't feel quite strongly about them, actually. You know that expression, I wouldn't be seen dead in that. Well, that's really true for a lot of people. They really would not want to be seen other than dead in it. So we clearly construct around ourselves a stylistic universe of some kind. But what are we doing when we do that? I think what we're doing is saying, here's a place, here's a world I would like to imagine and I would like to inhabit if I possibly can. The thing about your stylistic choices is that they're not important in the sense that you're not going to die because of them, generally. They're the things you don't have to do. So you can experiment with those. You can paint yourself this way or that way, sculpt yourself this way or that way, see yourself any way you want. You're allowed to take stylistic risks there. And when you do that, what you're really doing is inhabiting a slightly different universe. What about if I make this universe a little bit softer? What about if I make this universe a little bit sharper? What about if I make it a bit slower, a bit faster, a bit more baroque, a bit more minimalist? Walk into someone's house and you see the world that they would like to live in. They know that that isn't the real world, as it were. They know that it's a capsule that they've created. That's what all those books about interior design are about. They're about how to create a stylistic statement that you want to live in. And I think we do that because we constantly need to find new ways of reorientating ourselves, of finding out where we stand in this rapidly changing, continually new world. Which bits of the past we want to take with us, which bits we want to drop, which new things we need that didn't exist before, which things we can afford to neglect, which things we want to embrace newly. All of those choices, even go back to the haircut one, the decision to move along this axis towards the opposite gender in some way. You know, if I decide to go more feminine, which would be difficult in my case, that's a decision to experiment with being the kind of person who would live that life. It's sort of a double reflexive experiment. I want to be the kind of person who would live that kind of life. I want to be the kind of person who would wear short red hair. I want to be the kind of person who would wear a crew cut. So I think we use art really as a way of experimenting. Now we're quite used to this idea with children and play. When children play, we know it would be ridiculous to stop children playing. We know that they learn so much. They learn about how things work. They learn about the materials of the world. They learn about other people. Playing is learning. By about the age of 12 or 15, you've effectively been told to stop playing. Now you've got to start living your serious life. But in fact, art is the way that we continue to play, either by the actual doing of it, or the taking part in it, or the listening to it, or the looking at it. It's the way we continue to entertain new possibilities. It's very easy to see how this works with literature. You know, when you read a novel, what you're really doing is surrendering to the idea of a different world with a different set of rules, people you've never met, and you're seeing how the chemistry of all that works together. I better talk faster, they're leaving in droves. And so I think that what we're doing is we're moving towards a situation, first of all, where we understand that the best way to deal with rapid change is through our feelings. Our intellects help us to a point, and of course I'm clearly someone who enjoys using the intellect, but what really helps us is to have the feelings that belong to these new situations, to try to surrender to them and to enjoy them. And then perhaps on looking back afterwards, as I was saying earlier about looking at my own work, to try to think what it was that that was actually happening to us. What were we enjoying? What did I do then? Who was I when that was going on? And I think we need the experience of active, vibrant culture all of the time to be doing this, which is why it's particularly sad that in England, by the way, did you know that England has the third biggest defence budget in the world? Don't you think that's absolutely astonishing? That this tiny country should be third after America, of course, China, then there's England. And at the same time as we have the third biggest defence budget, we keep cutting our budgets for education and culture, actually. We spend less and less on those. And that seems to me precisely the reverse of what we ought to be doing. What we ought to be doing the other thing, actually, that we give a huge amount of encouragement to is financial services. England's very, very famous for its financial services. Yes. They've really been a boon to the world. But what we ought to be doing is thinking, how can people accommodate change at the rate at which it's now happening? And there's every sign that that rate will accelerate. You know, it's not slowing down. There's every sign that it will become pretty chaotic at times as well. But how do people ever learn to deal with all this new stuff? Well, I think they learn to deal with it by learning to experience and enjoy new kinds of feelings, different kinds of feelings, feelings they never had before, combinations of feelings they never had before. And to me, this is what we want from art. This is why we have an appetite for it. This is why you're all here. Not to listen to me, but to listen to everything else. You're here because you enjoy rehearsing that ability that you have to encompass things, to enjoy things. I think, do you think I should have a question time?
Yeah!
Yes!
All right, I won't. No, I will, but I'm not sure how long I've got, because I know Terry Riley is going to come in here, and I don't want to take up his sound check time. So, having said all those things about his piece, I don't want to go and ruin his show. Okay, so I will take questions. I think, but since there isn't a mic out there, I shall take this opportunity of telling you a joke while they get a mic together. This is a joke I like very much. I have to try and tell it without laughing, because it always ruins it. A very wealthy rancher from Texas decides to trace his roots, which are actually from the south of England. His family has been in Texas for several years, several generations in fact. So he goes back to Devon, and he's driving around in his chauffeur-driven car, and he sees an old yokel leaning against a fence, looking back. And he says to the guy, "Is this your farm?" And the guy says, "Yeah," and goes from all the way up the top of the hill down to the stream there. "That's all mine." And the rancher says, "You know, I can get up in the morning, drive all day, and I still don't reach the other side of my farm." And the old guy says, "Yeah, I used to have a car like that." Anyway, is there a mic, or should we just shout? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to come forward so I can see you without being dazzled. Okay, well, here's someone conveniently placed in the very front row. Yeah. Oh, can I just, sorry to interrupt you. Can I say one thing? Keep the questions very short, because I shall have to repeat them to the audience so they know what I'm answering. And, second thing, ask questions that might have some relevance to at least one other person in the audience. Oh, there's a mic. I will do this for a few minutes. I have to get off soon. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. My question is, when you talked about how you compose music in airports, and all these tapes running around the room, and I was wondering if you could speak on how now we've gone to such a digital in the spectrum where it's not done that way, and I feel like we're losing things, but we're also gaining things in that. So I was wondering if you could talk about that. Also, I was wondering if it might be at all possible for me to have one of your drawings from this afternoon.
What? Can you what?
Have one of your drawings from this afternoon as to collect.
Well, you know what will happen if I give you one, don't you? I love working digitally. I really, really enjoy it. And I love working in every other way as well. And I don't think anything really ever gets lost. New things keep getting added. So it's a little bit more difficult now to work analog if it excites you, but you can still do it. I find the digital revolution just unfolds day by day with more and more magical, fascinating possibilities. So I have no problem with that. It sounds like shit a lot of the time. We're just in the transitional phase, you know. My friend Danny Hillis, who I quoted earlier, has this wonderful expression. He says, "You call it technology when it doesn't work right yet." So it's still all technology, but it will work sooner or later. And by the time it does, we'll have moved on to another technology. That's what happened with analog. You know, by the time it worked really well, we moved on to digital. I have my favourite loudspeakers in my studio are from 1970. Jesus,